Sounds like Europe. Cross-border podcasting.
Hello and welcome to Sounds Like Europe, cross-border podcasting, a project brought to you by WePad. I am your host, Javi Caminero. For over a year, we have been doing this podcast and discovering how the podcasting industry is evolving in Europe. But today's episode is a very special one. That's because for the first time since I've been talking to you on Sounds Like Europe, we're going to have a look at the podcast industry outside of Europe. First of all, let me tell you about Think Media, a podcast production company from the USA. Think Media is a podcast growth and ideas company that specializes in podcast PR, creative partnerships, in-app placement, and out-of-the-box strategies that help shows find their perfect audience. A few weeks ago, Ana Ribera, executive producer of the WePad project, and Andrea Niesevich of News Decoder, WePad's French partner, were talking to Devin Andrade of Think Media to find a way to collaborate. We had a call with Devin and with Andrea Koskai, also from the Think Media team, and decided to make a swap. One of the Sounds Like Europe episodes has been published in the feed of their podcast, Feed the Queue, and we are publishing here today a very interesting episode of Feed the Queue. In response to a podcast episode that boldly declared the end of podcasting as we know it, the team of Feed the Queue delivered an investigation to uncover whether or not podcasting is still alive. This investigation is led by podcaster, journalist, and marketer Will Williams, who brings together a panel of sharp, no-nonsense detectives who also double up as podcast marketers. They are Ann Bird, Shreya Sharma, and Lauren Puzzle. The team interrogates the evidence, reviews the suspects, and reframes the tale. But as they piece together the truth, one thing becomes clear. The story is more than it appears. Their investigation then unveils takeaways on how the death of podcasting might instead be an evolution. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another episode of Sounds Like Europe. But for now, please enjoy this fantastic episode from our friends at Feed the Queue.
Hi, welcome to Feed the Queue, the ultimate podcast discovery podcast. I'm Will, and I work here at Think Media, a podcast growth and discovery company. In this episode, we're bringing you something special. Inspired by a conversation on another podcast, we'll be giving you our own answers to the question, is podcasting dead?
Oh, we here at Think, we like to listen, sometimes to podcasts, sometimes to music, and sometimes to audiobooks. Stay tuned if you like recommendations. We're gonna bring them to your ears. We'll share with you some things we've been loving, and we'll try to feed your queue. With us around, you'll never run out of things to listen to. With us around, you'll never run out of things to listen to, 'cause we'll feed your queue.
Hi, y'all. I'm so excited to bring you this panel discussion from the Think team all about the state of podcasting today. This conversation was inspired by the final episode of Slate's Hear Me Out, titled Podcasting is Dead. In conversation with Nick Hilton of Podot and Futureproof, host Celeste Headley suggests that podcasts, or maybe podcasting as we know it, is dead. We wanted to respond with some of our own thoughts on the topic, so I sat down with Lauren, Anne, and Shreya from Team Think to chat, with production help from Devin and Andrea. Shout out to Lee Rosevear for the handy song Sad Marimba Planet we used here, and so much love to Celeste Headley, Mara Curry, and the rest of the folks on the Hear Me Out team. Hi, I am Will Williams. I'll be moderating this conversation and adding in some answers. I've been here at Think for almost a year. I actually have to go check my start date because I think we're coming right up on it. I come from podcast journalism. I run a podcast production studio called Hughouse Productions, and I am so thrilled to be here for this conversation. Shreya, quick introduction from you, please.
Hello, I'm Shreya. I've been at Tink for 2 years now, believe it or not. I've been in podcasting for 5 years. Similar to Will, I started as a journalist in the field, but my background is in marketing. So now I do marketing strategy and PR at Tink. And Will and I also write Podcast Marketing Magic. So shout out to that.
Okay, Anne, introduction to you. And I see that you've said that today is my work anniversary. Is that true?
It is. Today is your work anniversary. We're Tink.
Wow, I love it here. Happy 1 year, everybody. Wow, this is great. Okay, quick little introduction to yourself.
Yeah, I'm Anne. I work with Tink and with Will at our production house. So we have a lot of experience making podcasts, marketing podcasts, and I come from a business background. So I'm very focused on, the profitability of podcasting and the business as a whole.
Andrea, I'm also going to ask you to introduce yourself because I think that being here from a production standpoint is just as important as being here as a panelist.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. The audio is bad, so hopefully we can clean that up. I'm Andrea. I've been with Tink for 1.5 years. Originally, I was doing production, helping on different podcasts, independent, also doing some social media, and started out with podcast marketing at Tink, and super happy to be here.
Thanks for joining us. And Devin, same for you.
Hi, I'm Devin. I've been at Tink for almost 3 years now. I come from a digital content production background, but a love for audio brought me to podcast marketing. And I love Tink, and I'm so excited to get to the bottom of this crime.
And last but of course not least, Lauren, quick introduction for yourself.
Hi, I'm Lauren. I founded Tink Media 5 years ago, and I write podcast newsletter. And well, I do think it is, I was thinking that is right because it was about this time of year and it was one of our first meetings and you were talking about going to the zoo when they were going to throw pumpkins and you were very excited about watching the animals play with the pumpkins. And I was like, who is this person? I love this. Also, my other role is derailing everything and I will be derailing during this true crime investigation.
Well, in fairness, I think that this investigation kind of begs to be derailed a little bit.
I gotta say, I love the URL that Will has set up here.
Thank you.
FDQ True Crime Who Killed Podcasts.
Oh, so good.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Oh my God. Can we please add some true crime music like here?
I can do that. So we are recording this in response to the final episode of Hear Me Out, which discusses the death of the podcasting industry. So before we dive into our perspectives on that and what we think about the industry, I think that we can solve this crime from our perspective probably pretty quick. So I am going to ask a question and then I'm going to count down 3, 2, 1. And after 1, you just give me yes or no. So here's my question. Is podcasting dead? 3, 2, 1. No.
Hell no.
So I am sure we all kind of had the same knee-jerk reaction to seeing the title of this episode or even the article that was posted on Slate alongside, I believe, or the post on Slate. I think that probably we all saw this and said, excuse me? I want to start with a question first. We're not going to be replying directly in conversation with this episode. We think it's just a really fascinating jumping off point for discussion about the industry as a whole and what we see as, I would say, probably a really thriving, beautiful space right now. But did any of you have any takeaways from this conversation that you found really prescient and really in line with how you see the industry?
I guess I can say I did think it is evolving, and they kind of kept on saying that. So if I could think of one thing that I would agree with, yes, it is evolving as as things do. And I don't know, I just can't imagine that if in every industry, every time something evolved as they admitted it was, if everything was deemed dead every time it evolved. So
Sure.
I was in agreement when they were like, it's evolving. Yes, yes, yes. And then from there wasn't tons of agreement.
Yeah, absolutely, Lauren. Shreya, what about you?
I think that I found it interesting that they kept saying that podcasting as we know it is dead. I would reframe that a bit as saying that maybe there's this fear that quality content is dying, which I don't agree with, but I feel like that's what they were trying to get at. And I found it interesting that, similar to what Lauren said, if every type of content industry had the same conversation, would they also be thinking that? Because I often take TV as an example, and they did that too, when they took it as an example of streaming being bad for TV. And there was a little bit of dip in good quality content, but it came back, and we're now seeing some very good TV come out. So I was in disagreement with the fear mongering that I feel like hyperbolic statements can result in.
Totally. Thanks, Shreya. Anne, what about you?
Yeah. I think it's important to like pay attention to like what one of the things they said was that success means different things to different people. And
Right.
I feel like you are always pointing this out to me and to clients that if you set your success as like a specific number of downloads, that's a moving goalpost, and it's always going to get harder and harder to reach that. And eventually you're going to reach the point where you can't have that success.
Right.
So I agree that like, yeah, there's going to be different ways to say that you're successful in podcasting and that podcasting is working and that it's a profitable industry. But if you keep setting it based on numbers, then you're always going to be dissatisfied, and then you're going to feel like it's dead because you're suddenly not making the money you were before. So I agree, but like, let's think about it more critically what that means.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that this gets down to, for me, the tension that I kept returning to in this episode was I felt like I am coming to podcasting as an industry in such a different way than the two hosts. The conversation was largely about being able to make a living in this industry and monetizing and supporting the incredible work that we've seen in podcasting through something like ads, because we know that ads typically are not going to pay what really in-depth investigative journalism needs to pay. However, I come to this perspective from a very indie DIY standpoint where I am used to everyone I know who is a close friend who works in podcasting is not under any illusion that they are going to make a living wage podcasting. And I worry that I focus too much on the indie because I do think that we need to be able to work in our space and have a living wage. But does anybody else have thoughts on kind of these two halves of podcasting, the networked, coming from broadcast, things that have financial backing versus indie? How do we reconcile these two conversations? Or are they just two fully separate conversations?
I think that both of these are important,
Right.
Like, okay, well, I'm going to take it back to books because I feel like I understand that world maybe slightly better.
Yeah.
So, of course, we have the more popular books and the more popular genres that everybody's reading, that are book talk famous, what have you. But that doesn't mean that you don't have experimental, independent authors out there who are doing their own stuff. They definitely exist on the longer tail end of the graph, but they still have a readership. And I think that they're just as important as those bigger books, those, for a lack of a better word, mainstream content that comes out. Because that mainstream content fuels the money into publishing and book writing, authorship as an industry itself. And my problem is that I don't see how the money that is being fueled and funneled in by celebrity podcasts and the ones that are able to bring in the big bucks. Like, I don't see how that money is translating to independent creators, because that's what I would like to see. And so I wonder if that's part of the solution of making these two hubs meet.
Yeah. Thanks, Shreya. Lauren?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought up books. I was thinking about that the whole time because I worked in book publishing for a long time. But, it also quickly, I would like to say, I get a little tired of people complaining about all the celebrity podcasts.
Yeah.
Because I don't listen to celebrity. Nobody's making you listen to them. Like, my library is full of really, really interesting things made by non-celebrities. There's beautiful things out there. Look a little bit harder. And I don't even let the celebrity podcasts bother me. But the publishing thing is such a good, the book publishing thing is such a good comparison because, I mean, I think I'm going to sound naive here, but I truly do believe this. I also think it hasn't been enough time for us to really, really see what's going to happen or what's happening. That's another big thing. Book publishing has been around for quite a bit longer.
Right.
But I still, how many times do you hear people say this? People are going to be rolling their eyes, but like, all ships rise. I really, really, truly believe that. And I remember in book publishing thinking when that Dan Brown books were exploding, I was like, these books are terrible. I'm so glad I'm so glad they're getting people to read. I was so happy to see people reading. I don't care if you're reading Dan Brown. Please read Dan Brown. It's going to help. I really, truly believed it was helping people remember how much they loved reading or get into reading or be like, I'm going to read something else. So if people, if it hasn't been long enough. The celebrity podcasts haven't been around long enough. I'm hoping that it gets people more interested. And you know what? I've seen it happen with like my dad. He started listening to a lot of interview podcasts and a lot of celebrity podcasts. And then you kind of dig a little bit deeper and you get into a little more interesting things. Your tastes kind of get a little more refined. You become a little bit pickier, perhaps.
Right.
I'm optimistic that happens, and that when the celebrity podcasts are getting, more popular, that there will be something else for the indies too.
Totally. Anne, go for it.
Lauren, I think it's so funny that you bring up the like really not great written books bringing people into like reading, because I was literally just talking to some people, I think it was last night, about about how like, do you read books that do you need a book to have a good character or a good plot to read it? And
we should say for the record that this resulted in the group chat that Anne and I were in being renamed to Bad Plot Enjoyers and Will.
Will needs a good plot to enjoy a book.
I need good quality across the board, or I'm not reading it.
Yeah, but the point that we got to was, I hate so many of the books that people on Book Talk are promoting because they're just not well written. But I love that it's getting people to read. Like you said, Lauren, like I love that it's getting people into reading, because then eventually maybe they'll get some taste and they'll want to read a better book. And it's the same with podcasting. Like you said, Lauren, people are listening to these celebrity podcasts. They're listening to the ones that are really popular. And then they're learning they like podcasts and they're looking for more. And then they are looking for those recommendations from places like Podcast Marketing Magic and Podcast the Newsletter and, stuff that we do. So it's a good entry point. And to say that the industry is like dying out because those are the ones that are popular, it's not how media works. Like, it's just not how media works. It works with movies. It works with TV shows. You got to have that one celebrity to get people in, and then they go, oh, I like this. Let me find more of it.
Right. Absolutely.
And to Shreya's point before about what are the like celebrities, the big podcasters giving back to the industry? They're not. That money is not going back into it.
So, Anne, what you were talking about kind of leads me to my next question. One thing that I found very interesting about the conversation is a lot of what they were saying seemed to be rooted in things that feel super true, but may not be necessarily backed up by data. So I was pretty surprised when there was a reference to Sounds Profitable's annual podcast report, the podcast landscape report, because I personally found that report extremely invigorating and exciting. So one part of this conversation that I found strange was this concept that audience growth is slowing. But they did mention that over 50% of American households right now are listening to podcasts. Do we have any thoughts on the state of listenership growth and whether we should be scared about those numbers? Yeah, Anne, let's start with you.
I know it's something like we say at Tink a lot, that it's easier to like convert someone who already listens to podcasts to listening to more. And it's hard to get someone who doesn't already listen to podcasts to listen to a podcast and to become a regular listener. But that doesn't mean it's impossible. And it doesn't, like, kids are growing up and they're going to start listening to podcasts because they're growing up in this, like, they're, I feel like as people, as like the world changes and the generations grow up, like, we're only going to get to more podcasters that, like, I don't think it's not going to keep growing, but I just think it's maybe not going to be as fast as it has been in the past.
Yeah, I completely agree with Anne there. I do think that we have a branding problem. And I think that there's an image issue that we have, which is just like, I don't know if any of you have seen that Instagram reel with another white boy with a podcast. And whenever I talk about working in podcasting, whenever I tell people that are not part of the industry, they're like, oh, really? There's more than just chatcasts out there? I'm like, yeah, my favorite genre is audio fiction, which is nothing like that. So like, they don't even know that that exists. And if we want to grow the pie, we have to find a way to include those people. So I'm just really like adding to what Anne said. I will say that I completely agree with you, Will. I found it very interesting that they brought up the Sounds Profitable study and kind of reframed that. I think my biggest takeaway from that study was maybe we have a discoverability issue as well. But YouTube seems to be, YouTube, not video, YouTube seems to be filling in that specific gap.
Ooh, yeah, let's put a pin in that. Lauren, go for it.
I just also think we have to mention, so there's two things that are in the back of my mind throughout all this.
Yeah.
We haven't even had people grow up listening, having their parents listen to podcasts, really,
Right.
you know? So when they're talking about being veterans or, you know, like podcasting, it's like, I mean, it just hasn't been long enough. But also, I think we have to recognize that this conversation came from a place of pain, a podcast being canceled.
Yes.
So that's a really sad, really, really sad, hard thing. I almost feel like I wouldn't want to have made this after that happened to me, because coming from such a hard place, and we went in thinking that Celeste was going to be saying that they're not dying, and she was absolutely not from the very beginning.
Yeah, no.
So we had two people who were on the side of podcasts are dying, and I understand why. But I kind of wish that someone in the conversation had been more on like the side that we are arguing. But I totally get, you know, I'm so sorry that this show ended. We do see that happening a lot, and I want to recognize that.
Yeah, and I think, you know, likewise, it's worth pointing out that we have seen massive layoffs. There were comparisons to the state of journalism consistently, and Shreya and I are both veterans of the world of journalism, like we know. And I think bringing up the fact that it's coming from a point of pain is important. I also want to point out, while it's on my mind, many of us, just for some bona fides here, many of us have worked in the industry for as long as guest Nick Hilton have. He said that he started working in the industry at like around 2016. That's also when I started. It's about when Lauren started, several of us. So just to put that out there, like, we also have been around for that long. And I would also agree that it's not long enough. But Anne, I know you've got something to say on this topic too.
Yeah, we should keep in mind also that like shows getting canceled isn't unique to podcasting.
Oh, yeah.
And when TV shows and Netflix shows and
Infamously Netflix shows.
Infamously Netflix shows. One that was on Amazon Prime Video just got canceled after its first season, and like HBO shows and taking them off of streaming so that they can take them as a write-off and stuff. This isn't unique to podcasting, and nobody says that TV is dead.
And you can't really cancel books.
Damn. That's so true.
Yeah.
So one of the other takeaways that I found, I'm just going to say disappointing. I was pretty disappointed by the continuing conversation in this podcast where I hate reducing it like this, but I think that they kind of were this reductive. Basically, they said like maybe podcasting in the sense where like quote unquote anybody can do it. Maybe that's good. Maybe gatekeeping the industry more is good. I have some pretty strong knee-jerk reactions to that across the board. Does anyone here happen to think, Anne, go for it.
Why are we gatekeeping podcasting? What are we doing?
Okay.
Thank you.
Guys.
Oh.
I would also argue like it is gate kept, right? Like I feel like I bring up this topic so often, but like having a microphone, including a phone microphone, including a laptop microphone, having internet access, having a computer, all of that is a barrier to entry. Like all of that, it's already gate kept by like literally the physical, tangible limitations of what people may or may not be able to access, right?
And you know what's interesting, Will, is that they contradicted themselves in the course of that discussion, because they were like, well, and I'm paraphrasing here, they said, well, I'm not saying that those are the most successful podcasts. I'm like, yeah, well, it's not about success in the terms of numbers and downloads and money. Some people just have something to say, and audio is such an amazing experience. Like I quickly want to tell you folks this story.
Yeah.
I went to a podcasting event in Saudi, which is a really interesting place to go to a podcasting event to. And I spoke to a lot of women who were wearing hijabs and such. And I asked them why they enjoy podcasting. And they said, well, I feel like I can be really free in this setting because nobody is looking at me and I don't feel gaped at. I don't feel judged. And so why are we gatekeeping it? Because the whole beauty of this is that everybody is able to say something. And this does bring it back to, the nature of the people involved in the conversation as well. Because I do think that some demographics would prefer to keep things a certain way. And then some are slightly more open to things changing and evolving and not necessarily branding that as dying.
Yeah, this was another thing that I think was incredibly shocking to me. I was shocked that there was no conversation of race, class, gender, marginalization, because for me, the moderately more democratized landscape of podcasting is part of the reason why so many marginalized folks, like many of us here and like many of our favorite creators, get to create at all, because there isn't a network telling them what they can and can't do. We don't have Disney saying make Inside Out Part 2 less gay and then firing everybody. We get to like actually tell our stories.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like the people in this conversation were so dead set on podcasting going a certain way, and it didn't. And so they're like, they're like, throwing their toys in the sandbox and going home. And I think, people on this call are kind of went in more open-minded and excited about where it would go. And we're still kind of watching and continuing to be a part of that exciting space that it is. And I'm still interested to see where it's going. I'm not negative about it. And I don't have a set idea of where it's going to go. I'm curious to find out where that is.
Absolutely. Shreya, I want to hop back to you real quick, because the way that I think about this whole conversation, I think you specifically will appreciate this. I think about fanfic a lot.
I was just thinking about that, Will. I was like, I don't want to keep bringing it back to writing, but
Well, I think the thing about podcasting is like we kind of do have to compare it to other industries because that's what people know, and that's what our blueprints are for. You know, we don't like there's not a big national conversation about like what publishing a podcast looks like yet, you know? So I think other industries are a great jumping off point. But Shreya, if you could just kind of connect these two ideas of podcasting and fanfic, I know you can do a great job here.
Yeah, thank you. I thought of that when you mentioned the gatekeeping part, because everybody can write a fan fiction, and everybody will. Everybody will, and everybody should. This is what this whole show has been about. But there are so many authors that make it, in my eyes, they make it big and they're successful. And they start with writing fan fiction, and the barrier to entry is so low that it can then evolve into something really beautiful. And even in the like writing and reading industry, there's a certain stigma attached to being like having been a fan fiction writer. So a lot of big authors will not admit that I used to write fan fiction. But we know. But we know. Yeah, I read that. Looks like a little, no. You've seen Supernatural. I can tell. But I really find it beautiful how open just the act of like writing fan fiction, like Archive, like AO3, Archive of Our Own, Wattpad, all of these websites have made it easy to access writing, and it just makes it being easy to be creative. And so like
people do it because they love it. Nobody's getting paid for fan fiction. Like a handful of people are being paid for fan fiction, and it's because they removed it from the fan fiction sphere. They're, by definition, because fan fiction like is copyright infringement, nobody is getting paid for it, and people are still writing hundreds of thousands of words of fan fiction because they're passionate about it. Is that not what we're doing here? Is that not?
And I'll turn this to you, Will, and like as well to other people. But do you think that some people would have been writers if they hadn't had the opportunity to start as a fan fiction writer?
No, absolutely not. And, you know, I even think that like a lot of people get into podcasting because they've come from those spaces and they see something transformative. You know, I just think it's really beautiful. And I think that everybody needs a place to start. And it just feels so silly to me. Like nobody is saying, oh, we have too many YouTube channels. Nobody is saying like, oh, we have too many kids making home movies with an iPhone. Like,
yeah, I think we're too critical on ourselves, I think.
Absolutely.
Sometimes.
Lauren, did you have something to add here?
I really wish Faye was here, but Faye is actually teaching young girls how to DJ in China. But Faye understands the music industry. And sometimes I ask Faye to tell me stories of the music industry because that's another place we can look to, right? And I don't know enough to speak to that. But I do think, like, can you imagine if you were like, and you started a band with your friends and you were like mad that you didn't have a record deal with a humongous label? Like, and you were like, music is dead. Like, no, there's like this thriving music scene of some of the most beautiful things happening in the indie, you know, music scene. Like, you know, that's kind of like actually, I would say arguably the best, most exciting music scene, you know, so maybe we can look at podcasting like that.
I love that. Okay. I'm going to take us on a hard pivot to what might be one of our last questions here, depending on time. But another thing that was discussed is the prominence and prevalence of video in podcasting right now. And one of the things that I found very interesting, and I think that Shreya kind of touched on this earlier, is in that Sounds Profitable report, we found that YouTube is kind of the number one place to listen to podcasts and to discover podcasts right now. I'm not even going to position this as a question. I'm just going to throw out an opinion. I don't think that means that podcasts need to have video to thrive on YouTube. There wasn't a conversation that I saw in those stats saying I only will engage with a podcast if there is active live video of the hosts talking. YouTube can be a discovery platform, even if the podcast is just a static image of the cover art. I have been pretty upfront that I think that if you have a quote unquote podcast that is video first, lives on YouTube, and either has an RSS feed to podcatchers that is audio only, or doesn't even have that, is just on YouTube, it's simply not a podcast. It's just it's a YouTube channel. So how do you think we should conceptualize YouTube's rise to prominence in the audio sphere and what that means for people who are suddenly panicked that they are going to have to be producing video along with audio?
I don't know if this is a train of thought, but it's just reminding me of how when we entered this, discussion, we are not using video to talk to one another. And that brings up, the idea that Terry Gross, isn't on Zoom with people when she's interviewing them. And that's why the conversations are so good. And that, and also people say things that they wouldn't say when they can't see one another. There's so much that people don't want to lose with that. I just think maybe they're separate things and we can think of them as separate things.
Thanks for bringing us back to this, Will. I think this is such an important conversation to have. And it is because there is that panic. Like even at Podcast Movement, where Sounds Profitable shared this, even then we were getting a lot of panicked questions from some of the smaller shows and independent creators. I like to think of YouTube as just that, a discoverability platform. You just need to be present on it, and you don't need to be you don't need to have things that are ugly, essentially. So even if you have just a static cover art on there, imagine if we posted this conversation to YouTube and there was a silly picture of all of us. It's fine. It's fine. I compare it to Google. YouTube can be a really great tool for finding new content. And this is what Tom Webster consistently said, even when he was presenting it. He never said that, you need to have a video in there. And think of it as Google, where you do optimize your website, you optimize your presence to account for SEO, and just do all the basic stuff. And YouTube has a really great SEO optimization as well. So yeah, I'm not too worried about that.
Yeah, people seem to be ignoring the part where most people will open a podcast in YouTube and then go to a different tab or do something else and not even watch the video. People are really ignoring that part of it.
That's exactly what I was gonna say. Is the fact that YouTube is such a great search engine because it's just Google.
Yeah.
It's Google, so it's obviously going to have the best SEO functions and everything. Google's been doing this for years. They've built themselves up to be the best search engine. Then they bought YouTube. So now YouTube's the best search engine. Right. So it's going to work really well to find new podcasts. And I think the fact that YouTube offers a paid subscription just to be able to minimize the app while you're using it, tells me that people don't want to watch the YouTube videos all the time. They just want to listen to them. And it's something that they've realized is something worth charging for. So I don't think the video is always the most important part, unless you have a really good video. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
If you don't, I feel like we tell this to people all the time who ask, should I start doing a video component to my podcast? And while we say, yes, being on YouTube is going to be important, if you don't have a really good video quality, if you don't have a really good video presence, don't push for it, because it's not going to be the most important part of your production. Make sure your audio is good first.
Yeah.
And the static image is just fine. Does anyone here ever watch anything on YouTube? I think, Will, you do watch actual YouTube, and I want to know about that. But does anybody here listen to, is there a podcast that you're actually that is worth watching on YouTube?
I actually subscribe to a lot of channels, and I think I've sent Will some of these recommendations as well.
Yeah.
Which is just a talking head, and I listen to it. It's supposed to be a video, and this person is just like talking at you, but it very much is podcast content. Like it'll be about the Salem witch trials or something like that. I'm like, I don't need to see anything. This person is just talking. So I in my head, I'll kind of think of that as a podcast too, because it's like you said, like I minimize, move on, and it's just running in the background. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Lauren, because it's not exactly that, but I treat it as a podcast.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that I only have 2 podcasts where I listen to them as podcasts, but I also do find the video kind of enriching. And those would be Sad Boys. And I think it's worth pointing out that Jordan Adika comes from podcasting before he is a YouTuber, like literally chronologically, not in like what he prioritizes necessarily. And Respect the Dead. I enjoy the video for both of those, but I can also listen to both as audio. And I think that those are maybe exceptions. But usually when I'm going to YouTube, if I'm like looking at it with my eyeballs, I want it to be visual first.
Oh, sorry. Critical Role. I forgot. I was like, I know that I do.
Oh, yeah. That's a classic. Yeah. And like, that's the thing is like, I feel like having a presence on video and having a presence on audio are 2 completely different things. When you have to think about how you are appearing on video, that's like a huge part of your brain that is doing a separate function, where you're focusing on that versus if you're just focusing on audio. Like when I'm on video calls or doing like webinars or what have you, those would never translate well to audio because I am thinking about like, stay in the light, make eye contact, even things like that. And I think the same is totally true for YouTube. And I think we can also see this in regards to TV and other screen actors who then come to podcasting and try to be voice actors. And it's not good. Yeah, Anne, go for it. I see you've got something to add here.
Yeah, have you ever seen those videos? I think they usually end up on like TikTok or something. And it's like comparing the different kinds of acting. Like when you're acting in front of a camera, and it's like stage acting versus TikTok acting versus YouTube acting versus like showing the different ways you hold your body and you emote and you do like there's different levels of voice acting too. And
right.
And, if you've got you just say things differently and you hold yourself differently depending on what medium it is. And it doesn't always translate across video to audio.
Yeah, I've tried being a YouTuber. It doesn't work. I'm not good at it. I've tried being a podcaster, marginally better. So I want to leave us off with one final question here. I'm just going to go down the line and ask everybody in sequence. Producers, if you also would like to add something here for just a moment, feel free. Let me know in the chat if you would like to. But what is evidence to you that podcasting is alive? Or what makes podcasting feel alive to you? For me, podcasting feels alive, and I have evidence that it is alive because I see marginalized creators who would not be able to tell their stories in such a widely broadcast way. I see them still creating and podcasting and still finding meaning in it. That's what makes it feel alive to me. Lauren, what about you?
I love this question. I think it feels alive to me because there's still really more exciting things popping up that I have time to listen to.
Yeah.
So I don't need to spend my time listening to things that annoy me or even acknowledging the existence of terrible celebrity podcasts. They're like little gnats that are flying around. I just don't even worry about them. So there's just so much fascinating stuff still happening.
Little gnats flying around is so accurate. Anne, what about you?
Oh no, I'm still laughing about that. I finally gave myself leave this past week to start unsubscribing to podcasts that I was just listening to for the sake of it.
Genuinely proud of you.
Free.
Genuinely.
There's better things I could be listening to. I don't have to listen to this one anymore.
Wow,
That's right.
That's some bonus content, hearing that list.
Yes.
Right? There's new shows coming out, though, that I want to listen to. And there's shows that I've been listening to for years that I'm like, ugh, I'm just listening to this one out of habit.
Yeah.
And I don't really enjoy it anymore. But there are new shows that I want to listen to. I meet with people every week who have something so creative and unique that they're coming up with and that they're releasing soon. And I'm like, I want to focus on that instead. So I know podcasting is alive every time I talk to somebody who's got some really creative idea, or I go to these podcast conferences and we talk to people who are so excited about just getting into the industry. Because Lauren, you keep saying it, podcasting hasn't been around that long yet. We don't know yet. People are just getting started with it. It's not dying. It's just a baby.
It's just a baby.
It's just a baby.
I love that. Shreya, what about you?
Similar to what Anne said, attending events really drives that in. I think podcasting felt really alive and continues to when I was at Tribeca this year, and especially whenever I listen to short audio. And I'm going to compare short audio to short stories here. And short stories, again, as a writer, is such a great way to start dipping your toe in writing itself. And I love it when people make short audio because it's such a great way for the creator to enter the space. And it's also such a great way for a listener to be introduced. And I'm really falling in love with short audio. So yeah, I would say that listening to those and seeing those happen, and especially from more marginalized people that I haven't heard longer form content from, makes me feel like podcasting is well and alive and thriving.
Not to toot my own horn here, but we are a Tank branded podcast. I just really love working with people who are so against this sort of industry nihilism that I think has been plaguing us since day one. It's so nice to work with people who are just really enthusiastic about audio and podcasting and what makes it so special and what makes it clearly, from our perspective, still absolutely thriving. So thank you all so much for this conversation. It was beautiful and also cathartic.
Oh, thank you. I know we needed this. We really needed this. Thank you. I feel like this was a big hug. And thank you for doing such a good job with the questions and moderating.
Oh, thank you. So if you are looking to fall back in love with audio and to remind yourself that podcasts are alive and well, here are some recommendations from the team for things that have recently made them fall back in love with audio. For me, this has to be this year's The Competition, which is all about a scholarship competition, the largest one in the country, where senior high school girls go to compete to win a scholarship for college. And this documentary is hosted by somebody who also was in this competition back when she was in high school. Now, she didn't do great, but that makes her a really fascinating host and judge of the competition. And this podcast surprisingly has a twist, which I found really compelling and beautiful. It's a great listen. We will link my recommendation and everybody's recommendations in the show notes, and we'll also have a playlist that you can check out.
So I got into podcasting through the fiction genre. And for the last few years, I've just felt really burnt out on it.
Mm-hmm.
But I love Tiny Dinos.
Yeah, it's so good. It's so good.
And it's gotten me back into listening to fiction podcasts again. So I'm so excited because I really do love the industry and the creators. And I want to show more love to fiction again. So Tiny Dinos is about two scientists who are best friends, and they do a secret thing. And it's you can't tell anybody about it except that they do in every single episode.
Yes.
it's just very funny. And it's an improv comedy. It's not like a scripted fiction, which is what I come from, but
Right.
it made me love fiction.
That's funny that you say that, Anne, because I feel that way about Valley Heat. I generally don't listen to fiction, generally. But Valley Heat, I found myself, but I love reading fiction. So I still cannot figure out why that is. But when I listen to Valley Heat, I find myself like stopping it and slowing it down and going back because I don't want it to end. And that's what I do when I read like a really long book. Like I can feel myself reading slower because I don't want it to be over. And that's how I am with Valley Heat. Like Valley Heat is pure enjoyment. But I would also say a fun one that I was like, oh, this is fun. Hang Up. I think that's one that I think it's got me very excited about. Like, oh, let's do this. Let's do this crazy thing. So Hang Up is a kind of dating game, dating show that's live and real. Yeah. And then Valley Heat is this fictional storytelling of someone in there. It's a real place in California, but it's a fictional guy who's reporting on his neighborhood, and it's incredible and genius and Shakespearean, I would say.
Shreya, what about you?
Lowlines made me fall in love with audio again.
Oh yeah.
Lowlines, I think, is for me what audio is about, because it does have the independent creator angle to it, where you just have one person unscripted traveling across the Americas looking to get lower and be grounded in reality and present again. And then so you do have this raw audio, but then you also have excellent production. And so that makes that raw audio feel exciting and accessible, hopefully. So yeah, I love Lowlines. Lowlines is a podcast which follows Petra Barron, who's a food journalist. And she travels, like I said, across the Americas, looking to plant her feet back on the ground and just befriending strangers along the way. So check out Lowlines.
Perfect. And we'll have all those recommendations for you in the show notes. We'll have links to the Sounds Profitable study, links to the original audio piece in case you want to reference it, and of course, links to all of us here at Tink.